Seven on Sundays podcast is intended for mature audiences. Episodes discuss sensitive and fraught topics that many teens and 20-somethings face, but may be triggering. The content may not be suitable for all audience members. Please take caution when listening.
From pretty much the first time I had sex, losing my virginity, there was choking involved. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is new. And I didn't think that it was anything. I just thought that that was, a normal part of sex.
When you're in bed and someone's choking you and you don't know how hard they're going to choke you and what's going to really get them off, and if they're going to let up, that is downright frightening if you know nothing else about the person.
Hello and welcome to Seven on Sundays, the podcast about how young adults are navigating sex, relationships, and life today.
We are your hosts, Dr. Chez, Leeby, and Stephanie Boye, and each week we will share our candid conversations with young adults and experts about today's tough topics.
Welcome to Seven on Sundays. Today we are talking again with our guest Joy. She was our first guest, and we had her back because we wanted to talk about something she brought up that we didn't really dive into in the initial interview, and that was sexual choking. We really dove in this time, and I think this is an essential listen for anyone, parent or young person, male or female. If you have a partner, if you consider choking, if you watch porn, if your partner, if you suspect they watch porn, I highly recommend listening to this. This is, I think, one of the most important interviews that we've done. So without further ado, let's jump into our interview with Joy.
Joy, we're really happy to have you back because in our first interview with you, there was so much explored, and Stephanie and I both have had parents and people say, wow, there was a lot in there. And you are not only open with your experiences, but you're also kind of studying and understanding this stuff for your own future professional endeavors. So we're really excited to kind of hear your take on all these tough topics. There was a lot that was brought up that we definitely wanted to revisit. So
I just want to say, Joy, specifically, I would love for us to start with the topic of choking in hookups.
I mean, from pretty much the first time I had sex, losing my virginity, there was choking involved. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is new. And I didn't think that it was anything. I just thought that that was, a normal part of sex. It just felt very aggressive. And it's a common theme in pretty much every single hookup I've had. But it's always when, I'm hooking up with boys, it's, oh, don't do that to me. Like they don't want to be choked. But it's almost always assumed that I'm okay with it. And, I don't want to sit here and say every single time I'm not okay with it, because I do think that like there is a sort of like pleasure in it sometimes when it's done sensually as opposed to aggressively. And I think that a lot of boys just do not understand that line.
Can you tell us the difference? Because I think we have to be really clear about this. What is the difference between, in your opinion, what is sensual and what is aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like the neck is a very, it's a place during sex that can be, and even just like in intimate moments that, creates arousal, things like that. If it's just like a light hand placement, that's one thing. But then the line kind of comes when it's like the squeezing, the same way you can like kiss someone's neck, you can tell when that moves into like biting and it hurts, if that makes sense.
can you share with us what age were you when you said this first happened? Are you talking like 16, if I remember, something like that, when you lost your virginity?
I think it was It was 16. Yeah, 16.
So that first person, you had that experience and you had no context about what this was. You just went with the flow. Like you didn't know, oh, this is a thing, or did you already know that?
I didn't know, like, I had seen it in shows and stuff, but nothing, I had never experienced it.
Okay. And have you ever, if you don't mind sharing, have you ever been to a point where you've been unable to breathe or kind of really held tightly?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what happens in those cases? What do you do?
I feel like I kind of go outside of my body in those instances, or, I'll put my hands on his hands, like, kind of to indicate, like, "Oh, okay, that's enough." But sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. I think sometimes they like the harder, where it looks like I can't breathe. It feels like they kind of get off on that.
Do you tell them beforehand what your boundary is and when like the way in which it's too much for you?
Not necessarily. It's usually in the moment. Obviously, I have certain boundaries when it comes to sex. And so in the moment, I'll be like, no, I don't like that. Or, I think it's just if I'm, grabbing my neck, like it's obvious I can't really breathe, that should be an indication to them, like, hey, that's too much.
This sounds dangerous. Like, that's the only thing I can say. I mean, I'm assuming that just by the not because of anything you've said, but because of what we know that this is happening very regularly and people feel like this is just normative. This is normative behavior of sex. This is happening with people you know well and people you may not know as well. Would that
Yeah.
be accurate?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So if you don't know someone, how do you know that they are going to stop? Like how do you have a level of trust that they are going to stop?
That's the issue is you don't,
Right.
which I think that risk is there with anyone that you're, being intimate with that you don't know. So that's why I think, like, there has to be some kind of level of, like, trust or connection there to be able to have those conversations or, like, like, we can keep having sex, but, let me be able to breathe.
That's
Right.
actually really scary to me. I have to be honest. And I say that to you, one, because we've talked before and we know each other, but like I think about my child being in that situation and I care about you like I would care about my own child. And I just think that is taking an awful lot of risk on as an individual with somebody that you don't really know. Do you feel like that? Like outside the experience, do you hear what I'm saying? Are you like, yeah, like I know in the moment it's probably a little bit different, but like when you step away, are you kind of like that is a lot of trust I'm putting in someone I don't know?
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
The reality is, though, it can happen with somebody you know too. I mean, we've heard that. So even if you know them, what happens in the quote unquote bedroom may be these kind of things. And they become so normative that they're even on a TV show. It's a series, right? That you're talking about. What show are you referencing?
I can't remember like specifically. I just feel like it's probably like Gossip Girl or like
I can tell you it was in just because my research. I can tell you it was in Westworld. I don't know if you saw Westworld. It was also in Euphoria, obviously, more famously in Euphoria.
Yeah. So what this is doing is kind of giving the green light to, those are shows that mainly girls watch, I guess. So this is giving the green light to girls to say, so boys, we know where maybe they're getting that from, or guys. And then girls or women, young women, teens, whoever are watching these shows and they're thinking, oh, okay, so this is normal. If they're not watching porn, they're seeing it there. So, and that's what you said happened with you. So it's very interesting because this potentially dangerous activity has become, like you said, so normative that nobody's questioning it. And maybe you're not questioning, because I'm sure the shows, and porn isn't showing the consent process. So that's not happening. So Joy, my question for you is, have you, or do you know of people that have had those experiences where it's been taken too far and like they have bruises on their necks, or they have, felt very scared that this has gotten out of control? Have you experienced that, or do you know of anybody that has?
I don't know of anyone that has, but I can definitely say for myself that I have experienced those moments where I'm like, if this goes on any longer, like, am I gonna like pass out? Am I gonna lose consciousness? Like, it definitely feels pretty scary in the moment. And it's also, I think, more scary for me is not having that like autonomy over myself and not having that control. And I have noticed like, marks on my neck afterwards for like the ones where it's been a bit too much.
For the people that you've been with where you felt like, oh, hey, wow, that's a little too hard on my neck, and you felt like it seemed to be getting them more aroused, I guess was the way what you were trying to describe, correct?
Yeah.
Is there a part, because this is the one thing I know about pornography and young men and young women, it really messes with our sexual arousal and our sexual satisfaction, because you are going for whatever your sexual template is. So your sexual template is what turns you on, what arouses you, right? So if they are into pornography where there's choking and someone seems in distress, that's the level that they need. It's also the level that if you wanted to get them off, or if you felt as though your job or your goal was to get them off, and sadly, most girls feel as though a hookup is successful when they've gotten a guy off, not when they've gotten off. This has like been proven by study after study. So if your goal is to make sure that your partner is satisfied, is there a part of you that's like, I'm going to let this go a little risky, a little harder than I like, because I really want to see my partner get off?
Yeah, for sure. I think even I've noticed in like my own like defense mechanism kind of way of, say that they're choking me lightly or like their hand is just there. If I act, like it's harder than it actually is, then maybe, they won't go harder or they won't, get to the point where it's like, okay, now I can't breathe. So like that defense mechanism comes in because I know that what they want is to see me, struggling to breathe or like they're holding me down. So I definitely feel like I've like performed in that aspect at the beginning before the choking gets like really aggressive. And then definitely during it sometimes I'm just thinking like, okay, like if this gets them off. And this was a lot before I kind of had my own journey of like, finding my own voice when I'm having sexual experiences. So that's kind of speaking in the past, whereas like now that I know, the porn aspect of it and things like that, I don't really want to get to the point where I can't breathe. I don't want to encourage them getting off to me not being able to breathe. So that's usually kind of where I'll like, all right, put my hands on them and be like, all right, that's enough. Like,
Or them getting off to you being an actress. Like, the age old thing of women kind of faking orgasm or whatever. This is faking distress, like faking harm and hurt and distress and near passing out or whatever. So this is a whole nother level of, you're not faking pleasure, you're faking distress, which is really interesting, and really interesting that you know that you figured that out, that like you subconsciously just go right there because that's what's going to work. So that's concerning. That's very, very concerning. And I know you're in a different place on this journey, Joy, which yay, you're in a whole different place with this voice, but with your voice. But anyway, I think that's an interesting aspect too.
I think that we're using words that aren't actually accurate. It's not interesting. It's actually, I have to say,
Sorry.
concerning
Yeah.
and disturbing.
Yeah.
And any
Sorry.
parent who hears this and any young person who hears this is not interesting.
No,
This is
you're right.
disturbing. This is
Super
scary
disturbing.
and should scare any parent. And I think, Joy, probably where you are in your journey, you see why it's scary.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think you probably see why it's scary for even young girls younger than you. Like, you're not a freshman, but like, you know that there are girls going into college. From what I know, most young people have experienced this even in high school, makeout sessions at parties, things like that. It's that common, but probably not to the level where you're being choked to what it sounds like you are, where you are at a place of distress. Is that right? Do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So there's girls going into college. There are guys that are, they're, so what we explained in a last episode, and I think this is important. You people when they have habituated pornography, not even sometimes habituated, but when they've escalated into certain genres and those genres create their sexual template, a lot of times they are having sex with a body, doesn't matter what body it is. That body is really the means to the end. They're literally in their minds in the porn that they watch that turns them on, the one of choking someone. They're performing it on you, but really you're just a reenactment of a porn that they watched. So if that girl was in distress, if that's what turned them on, was the girl who was in super distress, that's what they want to see in you, right? So it's very disturbing that you are not even the person in this sexual, like in their head, in their fantasy, in their head. This is the girl in the porn, but you are the body that's like the avatar, for lack of a better word, for this experience for them. And I find that very upsetting. And I think that people don't understand that like this is something that could be very scary depending on what your partner acclimates to. They might be the nicest person. They could be the pastor's son. They could be a pastor. They could be a pastor in training. They could be a big hulky football guy. Who knows?
Yeah.
All of this is very upsetting to me. And I think that parents really need to, this is the canary in the coal mine. And I'm sure, Joy, it doesn't surprise you that there are people who have died from this.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Joy, have you had conversations with friends about no matter where you were on your journey, but let's say early on, did you and your friends ever talk about, I don't really want to be choked, or that was dangerous, or oh my God, I almost, passed out last night, or whatever? Do you and your friends talk about that, your girlfriends, or have you?
I would say it's less about choking and more overall just like like the aggressiveness of it, of like, it just felt like, oh, he was like pounding into me, or like it was just very aggressive. Like, I've definitely talked about that kind of stuff, but I think that it's kind of assumed, if we're talking about like, oh, he was just like way too aggressive last night. It's almost assumed like obviously he was joking.
Okay.
Can you, are there other things though that are aggressive that you've experienced or your friends have experienced that you can talk about that's generationally sort of accepted? And like one of our more recent conversations that we've been having has been about the term is face fucking, and there's a reason for it, that it's literally, well, there's two different things. There's face fucking and then there's facial abuse, where it goes beyond the holding of the head, where you can't get away. You feel as though you have, just like you're saying about choking, a feeling of I'm gagging, I'm about to throw up, I have water running out of my eyes. This is I don't have control over it. My mouth is being used as an orifice for this person's pleasure, and it's hurting me, it's choking me, it's gagging me, and I can't get away. Do you, like, is that something that's common in your opinion?
Yeah, 100%. Like the head pushing when you're giving head.
The head
Just
holding or head pushing?
it's like they push down on your head, or like they'll guide your head sometimes to like do like the motions that they want. But then when they, have their hand on your head, you can't, get up to breathe or like take a breath or take a second. Like, it just like takes away, I think that, giving someone head can be a sensual experience. I think that there's a way to go about it where, it can be enjoyable for both of you, but it sometimes will just get to this point where they're just like, you know, it just I just feel like my mouth is a hole. Like it's just another hole for them to buck. Like
Do you feel like you've lost like breath, or that it's very it hurts, it's uncomfortable, and there's lack of concern for you?
yeah, all of the above. It'll be like, keep doing this. I'll throw up on your dick if you keep do like that's what it feels like sometimes. I'm like, dude, like I cannot breathe.
Yeah.
Thank you
Mm,
for sharing these stories, Joy.
I
Yeah.
know.
Joy, did anyone ever tell you, like, this is the thing is, Dr. Chez knows this story that I went running out to my kids when I realized choking was a thing and said, Dad and I don't do this. But did anyone ever explain, like, this is going to sound weird to parents, but like literally you have to explain what consensual oral sex is like, that your head isn't being held, you should never feel in pain, you should never feel in distress, you should never feel like you're gagging, and that you don't have control to get away, to pull yourself away, to like reframe, reset. That in that I mean, choking never existed. I wish every parent would just tell their kids that choking never existed in my generation at all. Anal sex never slipped. These are things that are new sexual norms in your generation that parents need to be aware of. But did anyone ever say anything to you? Did you ever have a conversation with an adult that kind of said, "Hey, girl, I'm looking out for you and your best interest"?
Not really. I think the first time I realized that choking was something that was new and that was like porn script was when I met you. So I'd say that like hearing your talk for the first time was when I've learned that. But yeah, I don't think I've had like an actual conversation with an adult about that.
Do you feel like young people would benefit from hearing those kind of things from adults or guardians or people that are comfortable having we all have to get comfortable having these conversations with our kids, but do you think that young people should feel comfortable having these conversations with a person who loves them and has left a safe space for them?
Yeah, obviously. I think there is like such a lack of nuance and like honesty and transparency when it comes to the way that parents talk to their kids about sex. And instead of just like the basics of like, okay, this is how you get pregnant, this is how you don't get pregnant, I think that the conversation needs to be like, okay, here's what, a lot of young boys are being exposed to. Here's the reality. And here's how, you have to build consent skills. You have to build like a level of self agency to be able to like stand up for yourself in those situations. And, know that like I'm not just a hole to you. Like I'm not just, you know, a way for you to get off right now. Like this is an experience. And I think that those aggressive moments just take away from the experience and intimacy of sex and sexual whatever. Because I think that hookups can be sensual in the right scenario. It just takes trust and communication and moving slow.
If you had had a mentor or a parent or somebody in your life talk about, this thing with choking and that you have the right and the, with the state of mind to be able to say in any instance, no, I don't like this. No, I don't want to do this. Do you feel like, first of all, would it be respected if you did that? I guess it's how you do it, but would you feel comfortable doing that if you had the education? It's hard to go back, but let's just say you had the education about it. Do you feel like your intimate situations that you could have stopped it?
I'd say so. I think that, the only type of consent that we're taught is to say no when, someone's like about to like have sex with you. And so I think even those moments leading up, like learning how to set their boundaries and things like that, definitely is something that should be taught. And I wish that I had the self agency when I was younger to be able to, set those boundaries for myself. And I wish that someone had taught me that. And I think that, last time I shared my story of assault, but I think those little moments kind of like, having aggressive sex or like doing things that we don't necessarily want to, the things leading up to the sex. I think that just kind of like primed me to shut down when I was, being assaulted. And I think that that's a true story for a lot of girls.
Right. You knew that you could just get through it and dissociate. That was what you were kind of primed for. You're right.
I want to just say something to any young person who woman or man, who finds themselves in a situation like Joy. And I think that this is what I want Joy to hear too, though I think you're probably further in the journey than this, and you probably already know this. Most people, their sexual desires increase, they escalate, right? And what concerns me about somebody who is, you're faking distress, they're aroused by distress, unless somebody is actively working on trying to deprogram their brain from a porn script, there is a much greater chance that they're going to escalate into something more or want more or more, pushing the envelope more and more and more. So I say this because if you're in relationship with somebody who does that and you say, okay, well, I kind of find, in the beginning we would do some breath play or whatever, and it was somebody you trusted, but then it started getting more, or you're with a person who you think, oh, maybe I'll be in a relationship with this person, but they're sexually aggressive with like choking and things like that. Unless that person has a real awareness and a willingness to work on it, that would scare me as their sexual partner. And I say that because I read about it, I see studies about it. It's no different than escalating in anything else. And I just think it's something that is a red flag that maybe isn't looked at as a red flag. Maybe it's like, people are like, oh, they're afraid of being called vanilla, or that guy. I've heard even girls at school say that guy's like really vanilla. I would I would say be maybe less judgmental of the one who's vanilla, because the one who's escalating and the one who's pushing the envelope will continue to push the envelope until it becomes problematic. You don't want to be the person who's in the relationship with the person who's got problematic sexual behavior. It's probably not going to go well. It's probably not going to end well, and it's probably not going to be great for your relationship satisfaction. In fact, there's many studies about that too, that porn and all of the pornography destroys sexual satisfaction as well as the satisfaction of the relationship. Because as you can imagine, if you have sexual problems in a relationship, especially when you're your age, you got a lot of years ahead of you to be in a sexual relationship with someone, and that could be tough.
Definitely. I also think that from my experience, the guys that I've been with that are more aggressive and that I feel like I can tell are definitely following a porn script aren't the ones that are looking for a relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know like if there is a scientific correlation there, but from my own observations, they're not usually the ones.
Well, I don't want to like, this isn't really what you're saying, but I literally just did read something about those who are more aggressive are the ones who have lower opinions of women. I think that's been studied a couple of different ways over the years, but it was a more recent one that it's like they value women less in a lower, in a more denigrated or, way. But for a hookup situation, Joy, and that happens, what is your feeling afterward? Do you feel like I'm willing to go back out with this person? Or when someone does that, is it like, I kind of wish that every female and male, because this happens to guys too, had an ace in their back pocket. Like I keep thinking about it because I do this research that I'm like, I want to tell my daughter, if anyone ever does this, that you say, you know what, just give me a second. I have to run to the bathroom. And then literally, if the bathroom is down the hall, fucking just walk out the door. Just go out the door. It's not going to go somewhere good. Like,
I want them to always be thinking, always have an out, because I think girls obviously, it's something like 95% of men are stronger than 90% of women. 95% of men are stronger than 90% of women. And if it's not that, it's 90% of men are stronger than 95% of women, which makes it even worse for women. But think about that. 95% of men are stronger than you. And so if he wants to choke you, if he wants something aggressive, your chances are like less than 5% of being overpower him. So you have to outsmart him. You're not going to overpower, but you can outsmart.
And practice with that does make the likelihood that it would happen more likely. And if the research is correct that things are going to escalate, then that is an even bigger risk each time. So I used to always say to my kids and clients that when you learn how to drive, you think about, okay, where's my out here? Where am I going to pull over if I need to? Where am I going to exit if I need to? And I think that these situations, these, young generation situations, drinking and drugs and sex and all these other things and violence, that thinking in your head of what's my out and really practicing that, role playing that with somebody is really important. Because I wonder, Joy, if you have had the experience of things getting out of control. It sounds like you just kind of got used to initially dissociating, getting through it, role playing, whatever you needed to do. But if you had the experience of being able to voice your opinion and male partners respect that and say, oh, okay, my bad, let's back up. Has that happened?
Definitely with some boundaries that I've set. Like usually if they're a good guy, they'll back off.
Yeah.
So, I've shared last episode the situations I've been in where they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those are the ones that escalate to like more things that you don't want to do. And just
Right.
like you don't have autonomy.
Right.
So you just got out of a real relationship. And I want to ask you, because I know that we had talked before that relationship started. So I have a question. In your new relationship, did you set boundaries that or discuss things prior to with more, I guess, education or understanding of this stuff? Did you make clear your boundaries or talk about things that you were into or weren't into?
So we weren't actually dating, and it's like a bit of a complicated situation because there was like a big distance involved with that. But when we were in person, there was just I don't we just kind of could read each other really well, and I don't really know. We both were just kind of into the same things, so it was like a great match in that way. So if it and I only went to visit once, like a couple months ago, so it's hard to, you know, specifically like we didn't really have a talk of like what we're into, what we're not into. It just was something we explored in the moment.
You felt safe in the moment, and so that was a space that you felt safe to explore.
Yeah, and I felt safe, getting on a plane for like 14 hours to go see him. So
That's trusting. That's so trusting, Joy. I want to advise our listeners against you didn't say mind reading, but you said we read each other well or something. We could read each other. I mean, there's body language you can read, of course, facial expressions, all those kind of things. But that worked out for you in this situation, but a lot of times it doesn't. I have a lot of clients that doesn't work out. So I wouldn't leave it to, like, I trust gut more than anything, but I wouldn't leave it to we read each other well or we were in the same place, because most times people aren't in the same place necessarily because we all have different experiences that we bring into this situation. But I want to advise our listeners to be really careful with that, because that is what's happening, is that we're not communicating because we haven't been taught how to do that in a non-awkward way and in a healthy, easy way. So anyway, I would just say that. And for your relationships moving forward, Joy, my hope, our hope for you is that you know so much now. I love all that you learn, and that you're such a good communicator. And my hope is that you really, really find your voice enough that mind reading, body reading, or any reading, silent reading doesn't happen, that it's just clearly communicated, and that that's okay, that that doesn't have to be weird and strange. So that's a hope, but hope and joy. I like those two words. I have another question about trust. So, in your experience, Joy, how do you develop trust? You've had relationships that were, mistrusted or not followed through in being trustworthy. And I'm not saying in terms of cheating, I'm saying in terms of safety, which is like the bottom rung of importance here. How do you go about trusting somebody now?
I've had to really learn the difference between like intimacy and intensity. And so I think that before, if I had like, say, an intense sexual experience with someone, or I said, quote unquote, like, oh, we have intense chemistry, I confused that with intimacy. And so I just out of the gate would trust, when I think really taking a step back, like just taking things slow and, having that communication beforehand and during the experience, things like that. And also just taking my time when it comes to sex, like where I'm at right now, it's like I'm looking for a relationship. I'm not really interested in hookups in this moment. So just taking it slow, looking for red flags, looking for green flags, things like that.
That's great.
I love that your therapist said that to you, that you worked on intensity versus intimacy, because I bet that happens a lot in these days, because it's I guess what it's telling me is that your interpretation of somebody being aggressive, being kind of like super like all over you, is being misread as somebody who's really into you. Is that the way it's being read?
Yeah. And it's like this idea, like, I don't know if like dichotomy between like passion and aggression. Like you can have a really passionate, intimate, like sexual experience where like things do get steamy, things, there's like it is normal in a sense, or not normal, but like it's not always a bad thing to have, passionate sex, but knowing that difference and what you're willing to accept for yourself and what you're willing to tolerate, and kind of seeing the difference, because I think that in order to have passionate sex, you have to have that trust, or else it can easily turn into aggressive and scary, and where like lines get crossed.
Do you feel like sex should be scary sometimes? Like, that's an interesting word. Now, that is truly interesting, that choice of words by you.
I don't know necessarily if like scary is the right word. I would just say like I do think like some people enjoy like, power play in a way that's not derogative, in a way that like, I don't know. It's just like towing that line.
Mhm.
I guess if that makes sense, because like in movies and in TV shows, we're usually shown like really passionate sex
Mhm.
and, you know, grabbing onto each other, being really just in the moment. I can't really like think of the words right now, but I wouldn't say scary. I
'Cause I
I
feel like if you're feeling your body, if you're feeling everything that your partner is feeling, that is intense. That is passion, right? Like,
yeah.
even just being embodied. Because, like, I could intensely be with somebody, but I'm thinking about something else. Like, I'm thinking about that porn screen. And I hate to go back to the porn script, but I think the reason I'm doing it is because I want someone to realize that sometimes you can be super intense because you want what you want and you want to get it, right? And then there's I really want this. I'm feeling this body. I'm feeling the energy coming off of this body. We're reading each other. We're talking about what we want from each other, and that can be super intense and passionate. But it's not in. It's fully embodied. It's about you. It's about them.
Yeah, I like that description. Those are the
Yeah.
words I'm looking.
Such an important distinction, those two things. Have you ever had the experience where you've, let's say outside of an intimate moment, where you've actually talked to a boy about this kind of stuff, about the difference between aggression and intimacy?
I'd say like recently, if I go on a date or something, obviously this is something that I study
Mhm.
in school, so it's obviously something that I'm passionate about and that I talk about a lot. So I think I might be an outlier from like other people about like talking about this.
You're the
So
outlier, but you're the teacher. Like, this is where my hope is that you inspire others to do that, and that that becomes normative. Like, the new norm is, hey, let's talk about what we like or don't like, and let's talk about that fine line, or maybe it isn't a fine line, but let's talk about that difference. You, because you've been studying it and the age range that you're at, you're ahead of this curve and going to help others to understand how to do that and where it won't be awkward. The more that you kind of embody that or feel comfortable with that. But I'll say the word, it's interesting.
I just want you to know, don't ever dismiss, like, you are a beautiful girl. And I know that there's people out there that are like, oh, I couldn't say that. Like, I'm going to be like, a lot of girls, I think, feel disempowered because of the balance of young men in college today versus young women. There's always a difference. There's always more women on every college campus than there are young men. And I think sometimes it makes women feel a little bit desperate. I don't mean that as in you're desperate. I'm just saying, I think girls feel a little bit more desperate for that kind of connection. And it doesn't matter, beautiful, whatever, like, though, that energy of someone like falling in love with you and getting to know you and being able to be the partner that you need is out there. You don't have to settle. And I say that because I teach at a university, and I see the young men that come up to me afterward, that handsome young men that don't even know, they had no idea that these behaviors weren't acceptable. So you knowing this stuff, able to educate them, being this beautiful girl, you will have the right men appear in your life because you're putting out that energy. You're calling them higher. I like to say, you're not calling them out, you're calling them higher. So you're calling these young men to be better partners.
That is good stuff. Calling them higher. That is really, really good. And we can all call each other higher, to a higher and better. And, I'm looking at your name on screen, your pseudonym Joy, and calling this higher, up leveled thing that we're moving towards, I want your name to be capital J. Like, I just feel like this next is like standing in the really strong capital J, not the little lowercase j, but the really strong, like capital J. I'm going to voice my voice. I am joy. I'm going to stay in my joy of whatever is my joy, not compromise and dissociate to your joy. And this is important. This is really necessary for young women and young men to understand that they can do that. We are at the kind of end of our time pretty much, but I just want to really thank you for coming back and talking about so openly, talking about things that are, not talked about, and things that are really sensitive, and you're still learning and growing while learning and growing, so as we all are. So I really appreciate you being honest and sharing everything. It's very helpful.
Very helpful. Do you have anything that you want to add, Joy?
I think that growing confident in your sexuality as like a young woman really needs to go hand in hand with growing with your sense of self, growing with like your self advocacy, how you set boundaries in real life can like really translate to how you set boundaries in intimate moments. And so I think that,
Yes.
you know, it's not just oh, what do I like in the bedroom? It's like, what do I like in my everyday life?
Yes.
So I think like being able to stick up for yourself in small moments of like, oh, the barista got my coffee order wrong. I'm scared to say something. Like, no, go say something. That's, at least where I live, that's a $7 coffee. Like, have them fix it. I think that can translate in the bedroom as well. And
Oh,
Absolutely.
100%.
yeah, so I would just encourage young women to start advocating for themselves in everyday life, and then it'll be easier to advocate for yourself in the bedroom and in intimate moments.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. It's interesting because one of my students wrote a letter in my what I needed to know. And what they wrote is, I don't understand why it's so easy for us to order coffee or say what we want on our burger, but we can't say what we want for the most important things is how our body is treated. And I was like, it is so true. And that's sort of what you're saying is you're working it the other way. It's like start with these little things and build to the confidence to be able to say, this is the most important thing, your body, your sacred temple, who you are, and the safety of your body, the safety and protection of your body. I think Dr. Chez, that's like in Maslow's hierarchy, right? Is
Yeah.
safety.
Safety is
Like
the
that's
bottom rung, physical safety. And I will say safety of the heart too. This is assault to the body, but it's also assault to the soul and the heart, these kind of things. They
Mhm.
don't feel good at the core. One other thing I want to make sure we get in there, Joy, because this was really something that stood out. You called the choking thing the new hickey, and myself and parents that were in the room when you said that, that was very powerful. And I want parents to hear that again, because this is not oh, that person and that situation. This is the new hickey. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%.
So it's important that we do something about that. And you're right, from ordering coffee, burger to what I want in my sexual life with my heart and soul and body. Yes.
and sorry, this is like the never-ending conversation with Joy because she's amazing. You're an amazing
Thank
guest. But I wrote down something that you said, and I just wanted to say something about it. You said the scary moments take away from the intimacy. And what I wanted to say to you is intimacy should not be scary. End of story.
Ever, ever.
Ever, ever. There's not a moment where it should be scary. You should never be afraid the person's going to leave if you don't have sex because that's scary. You should never be afraid that they're going to hurt you. It actually, no matter what anybody says, the second that it's scary, it actually stops. It puts the brakes on women's arousal. You can read "Come as You Are" by Emily Nagoski, and she talks very much about how we can't be afraid we're going to get pregnant. No stealthing and removing condoms. This is another big thing. None of that stuff. When these things happen, scary or fear-based, it stops our arousal. But not only that, that's just our physiological. But in your brain, in your soul, intimacy should not in any way correlate to fear or scare ever. End of story. If you feel that way, it's not
Um,
intimacy. You need
it's
to
not
walk away from
intimacy.
that person.
Then it becomes trauma because then you're in fight, flight, freeze, whatever. You're not in open, la la, loving land. You're in the trauma response. So that is absolutely true. They don't go hand in hand.
Not even for a moment. If your intimate partner is scaring you in any way, you need to do some sort of work, you need to walk away, you need to do something because you should never be afraid of your intimate partner. End of story.
True.
Thank
Wonderfully.
you so much, Joy, for joining us
Thank you,
again.
Joy.
We
We
want you
love
back and
you.
back and back. We love you. You have such great insight. And yeah, you're in such an amazing place. Each relationship that I'm sure, whatever relationship is next, you are so much further along than the average, you know, uninformed person that we come across.
And
Yep.
then you were just a year ago.
Yeah.
So good
Thank
on you.
you.
All right, Joy, have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Wow, what a powerful interview. Thank you again, Joy, and thank you to our listeners for really, really tuning into this because this is a very important topic. I want to say a few things. One is thank you, Stephanie, for calling me out on my word interesting. And I have mixed feelings on this, and here's why. As a therapist, I am trained and I've honed that skill really well that most things that people say, I am not going to judge because they're here, because there's a problem that isn't spoken about. So I don't want to come across with a judgmental anything. I try to suspend that as much as possible. And one way to do that is to be interested in something. What you're pointing out, Steph, is that this is beyond interesting. I am a parent. I am a lover of all people, and I don't want people hurt or at risk. So it is highly disturbing. And I can share my real feelings about that. And that's the reality. I am disturbed. I am concerned. I am worried about what's happening. What I want parents to take away from this little exchange is that there is a fine line between that, and try to not respond to anything that your kids come to you with the that is so awful, because then it shuts down conversation, which is why I've been trained to not do that and why I don't do that. So there's a fine line where we can be real and we could be like, gosh, you know what? This really hurts my heart. That's really different than going, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. So I kind of feel like we have to really hold ourselves accountable. Thank you for doing that, Steph. You're a very good friend that you do that. And at the same time, be real, but be careful, and be careful with letting people feel free to share anything, because the reality is what's going on with young people today is shocking, is scary, is horrific to most of us, or will be and can be. And our goal, Stephanie and my goal, is to get the conversations going. So we don't want to censor ourselves, and we don't want to be shock and awe and not let them respond. There's many things into that. So that's just a little big piece of advice about a little word called interesting. The two things that were, I don't know if I'd say shocking, but important for us to look at as a society and for our young people. When you have to act in distress during something that is meant to be loving and joyful and, sometimes sweet, passionate, whatever, if you have to act in distress, that is a million red flags. So I want people to really hear that, young people, that acting in distress screams porn script. They don't go hand in hand, love and hate and harm. They don't go together. So just know that. The second thing that I want us to really focus on and talk more about as a community, and maybe in our online groups, Facebook groups, whatever, is how do you come to trust somebody? How do you come to trust somebody with your vessel, with your heart, with your soul? What is it that for young people, they can kind of go through those steps, those green flags, to be like, okay, all right, I'm going to trust this person. I think we need those conversations going. So those are my two thoughts in this moment.
I agree with you. The reason I was able to say to Joy that no, this is downright scary is because we have a relationship with her. We've spoken to her before. I care for her very much, and I want her to be safe, as I do for everybody here. And sometimes Dr. Chez is going to have to play therapist, and sometimes I'm going to have to play the person who, thank God, I have no restrictions on anything I can say. And I want to lay it down as I would if this was my child. And I would say, you know, there are a lot of ways to arouse each other. There's a lot of ways to have fun. Fear should not be part of it. Acting in distress shouldn't be part of it. In pain, hurting should never be part of it. So sometimes you will hear us playing those different roles, good cop, bad cop, if you will, therapist, mother roles. So I appreciate what you're trying to also say, because there is some truth to that, is that alarm right away to be like, oh my God, that's horrible, is going to shut your child down. So it is a delicate balance. And in response to your comments, Chez, it's not really in response to Joy, because I think I said everything that I want to say in response to Joy. I feel like I was somewhat prepared, but perhaps we need to do a follow up of things that can happen when you're choked too much. I know blood vessels in the eyes can pop. You can have issues with your throat, with your trachea, with trying to talk. You can have neurological damage from it. This is nothing short of a roll of the dice. It is Russian roulette with someone, as Joy said, and as most of my college students have said, hooking up is part of the college culture. That means you're getting into bed with people that you don't know very well. So I'm going to go back to, it's going to sound like I'm on my pedestal, but I want to go back to the intimacy pyramid. I really, really, really strongly cannot recommend strongly enough that you build a relationship, an intimacy with a person that you intend to have sex with on a variety of different levels before you get into bed with them. That doesn't assure anything. I mean, we've talked to girls who've been abused by their boyfriends. It doesn't assure anything, but at least it gives you a little bit more insight to who someone is. Maybe you'll see a red flag sooner. When you're in bed and someone's choking you and you don't know how hard they're going to choke you and what's going to really get them off, and if they're going to let up, that is downright frightening if you know nothing else about the person. I'm hoping that that person will show you some signs in earlier stages of getting to know them so that you don't end up in bed with them. But in a hookup scenario, you have all bets are off. It's Russian roulette. So this is nothing to do. I am the biggest non-slut shamer. This is not about shaming anyone for choices that you make to hook up with anyone as quickly as you want to. This is about the fact that I don't want any young man or young woman to have to experience sexual trauma, regardless of whether Joy says so or not. A lot of those situations were traumatic. And she did address that in the first one. They are traumatic. They're a trauma you have to get through. And I would say also another thing is you can wait until the next day. You don't have to hook up with someone in that moment. You can be like, you know what? Whatever. Come up with that ace in your back pocket that can get you out of any scary situation and see if they start acting crazy and texting you and doing stuff or following after you, you know you made the right call to get the hell out. But at the first inkling, at the first gut instinct that something isn't right, that they're doing something, that this is too much, ask to go to the bathroom. You know, I just really have to pee. I'll be right back. Get out a window, get out without your shoes. Who gives a shit? You can always get a new driver's license. No matter how much money is in your wallet, nobody carries money anymore. You can cancel your credit cards. Just get out. So
Don't
that's
even
my
ask,
only thoughts.
just go. And I want to say, from what you said, if you have to dissociate or if you find yourself dissociating, that means it's trauma. It is not love. It is not going to be love. It will not be love. That is trauma. That's a trauma response. So if you have to do that, that's a quadruple red flag for sure. And I love that you are talking about outs. I think that's what parents and kids can talk about is what are the outs? Yes, going to the bathroom, that's a perfect one. I'm, on my period right now, another one. There are many of those kind of things, but
I
we
have a
can
yeast
list
infection.
those.
Make it bad.
I have gonorrhea.
Literally.
Yeah.
I have chlamydia.
Yes.
Use whatever you have to use to get out of the situation. You know, I wasn't going to tell you, but I have syphilis. Like whatever the hell you have to use it. You know what? I have a condom out in my car. Use it. Go get the condom out in your car and get in the car and never come back.
Yeah.
Two things that Joy wrote, she wrote to me about things she wanted to know. And I think this is very interesting. She said she needed to know that intensity and intimacy are not the same thing. She also said she needed to know that me not saying no is not consent. 100%. 100%. 100%.
Bam. Yes.
Anyway,
Yeah.
thank you for listening to 7 on Sundays. This was an amazing conversation. We hope that you will join us again next Sunday at the same time, 7 a.m. Take care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of 7 on Sundays.
The 7 on Sundays podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Chez Leeby and Stephanie Boye based on our experience. It also shares the stories, behaviors, and opinions of our guest that we do not necessarily condone or view as healthy. 7 on Sundays is an open forum to discuss what is happening with our listening audience. Some names and details of our guest stories have been changed to protect their anonymity. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you are in crisis and in need of mental health support, please call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It is free and confidential.
Join the conversation and connect with us through our website, 7onsundays.com. That's the number 7 on Sundays.com. We encourage everyone to do their own research. Thank you and be well.